So I'd just like to welcome everyone to today's MGAA market briefing. For anyone that hasn't had the pleasure or been unfortunate enough to see me in this little box on Zoom before, so I'm Alison Cairns. I'm the L&D manager at the MGAA. So very pleased to have HF with us today, and we will be looking at cyber, which is, I think we will say, it's some excellent planning on our part because October is Cyber Month. So day one in Cyber Month, and we have a relevant market briefing for you. So just before we get started on the session, just a little bit of housekeeping that I need to do. So polite request to please keep cameras and microphones off, and also if you have activated any AI note-taking tools, if you could please deactivate them, as we don't have everyone's permission. Also reminding you that the session is recorded, but that does mean that I'll be able to send you a link afterwards, together with hopefully a copy of the slides as well, so that those will come through to you afterwards. Also, in terms of questions, hopefully that there will be lots of questions. So if you could pop those into the chat, that will be great, and we'll cover them off at the end. And yeah, just to say that no question is a stupid question. So any cyber related questions will be gratefully received. And my last bit of housekeeping is just to remind you that we are accredited by the CII for CPD purposes. So if this does meet with your training requirements, you can pop it onto your training log. So that leaves me to introduce Craig Kennedy from HF, who's with us today, and he's going to be delivering a session called Soft Targets, Hard Truths: Everything MGAs Need to Know About Cyber Risks. And on that note, I will hand over to Craig to start the session.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. So as Alison said, my name is Craig Kennedy. I am a partner and head of cyber consulting at HF, and October is recognised globally as Cyber Security Month, and it's a time to promote stronger cyber hygiene and resilience across organisations and individuals alike. So today being the first day of Cyber Month, there's really no better time to be talking about the issues that we're going to come to cover today. So over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to be looking at how and why hackers target their victims, the law surrounding cyber resilience, and why businesses now have to do better to cope with cyber attacks, and how businesses can give themselves the best chance of bouncing back rather than breaking down if they suffer a cyber attack. But before I get to how hackers compromise businesses, I would like to start with why they target businesses, and more specifically, why they target businesses in the insurance sector. So next slide, please. So if you were a hacker looking for the perfect victim, businesses in the insurance sector would likely be high on your list. And that's primarily because those businesses hold vast quantities of data, spanning personal information, financial information, medical and health records, commercial and corporate data, and behavioural and claims data. And on the dark web, that information can fetch hundreds of pounds per record, much more than you might get for a stolen credit card. And the insurance sector doesn't operate in a vacuum. Brokers, underwriters, MGAs, and reinsurers all find themselves connected to other corporate bodies. So if you hack one company in the insurance sector, you'll likely find yourself with access to a large number of other businesses. Now, cyber attacks put the insurance sector under severe pressure. It's heavily regulated, it operates on trust, and when an attack hits, businesses have to respond quickly and effectively. But the bad news doesn't stop there. The sector is attractive to every type of attacker. So for financially motivated hackers, the draw is obvious. Insurers are seen as having deep pockets. They're also interested in the coverage limits of corporate clients, because that intelligence helps them set ransom demands at just the right level. For nation-state attackers, the motive is different. They see insurers as a source of insight into which industries are most vulnerable, how risks are distributed across sectors, and where cyber disruption would have the greatest impact. And for hacktivists, insurers represent symbols of wealth and power. So bringing down a big player is guaranteed to make headlines and amplify their political or social message. And then there's so-called script kiddies, often just dabbling teenagers with basic tools. And for them, the appeal is notoriety, because if they even manage a small exploit against a big business, it gives them huge kudos in the hacking underworld. So the insurance sector is a prize target and businesses have to prepare accordingly. Next slide, please. So many businesses that I speak to still believe that they're not a target. They'll think we're too small, we're too specialized, we're not interesting enough for hackers. I've even had someone say to me once, nothing exciting ever happens to us. But if someone's looking to brighten up their working day, I would not recommend a cyber attack for reasons we're going to come on to look at. And plainly, the assumption is wrong. The reality is there are so many threats in circulation that organizations can be disrupted by cyber attacks, even when they weren't the intended target. Now, we know that the world is a turbulent place. There's a war in Ukraine and the Middle East. There's tension between China and Taiwan. North Korea remains active in financially motivated cyber attacks and cryptocurrency thefts to try to circumvent the financial sanctions that they are subject to. And geopolitical tensions mean that states and groups are constantly developing cyber weapons to disrupt their opponents. You may have heard of asymmetric warfare. As the missiles come this way, very often cyber attacks are the initial response before kinetic military force. Now, these weapons are very often state-of-the-art and they can cause massive disruption and destruction. So once they're released, the weapons rarely confine themselves to their intended target. So they've often in the past bled out into the public and the private sector, as we saw with the NotPetya attack that Russia deployed against the Ukraine in 2017, which decimated many global brands, including FedEx and Maersk. But more recently, we saw it again at the beginning of the Ukraine conflict in 2022, where communication networks in the Ukraine were taken down as tanks rolled over the border to give military action a head start, whilst the communication channels were compromised. And that spilled out, and famously a German energy company lost remote control of 30,000 wind turbines, and tens of thousands more were disrupted by communication outages across Europe. So there are lots of threats in the world that can bring cyber threat to your door, even when you weren't the intended target. Now, AI is the buzzword that everyone's talking about right now. Everyone is sick of hearing about AI, but the rapid adoption of AI has become a game changer, not just for businesses trying to improve efficiency. It's also made life a lot easier for hackers. So a lot of organizations are quick to embrace the benefits that AI bring round about efficiency, but far fewer stop to think about the risks. Because if you invite AI platforms into your business without the appropriate governance controls, it's the equivalent of giving an unvetted employee an access all areas pass. So the first risk with AI is it broadens the attack surface. If something is smart, it's vulnerable. If it connects to the internet, it can be compromised. So it's just another way into your business in the event that something goes wrong. But AI also amplifies existing risks. So AI can generate phishing emails that look real, malware that adapts to its environment, deep fakes, we all hear quite a lot of at the moment, which makes kind of confidence tricks or payment diversions much harder to deal with. And it also allows hackers to scan huge volumes of data and spot weaknesses far faster than a human ever could. And it can do it at scale. Now, the dark web is this murky world where lots of illegal activity goes on, whether it be drugs, weapons, or cyber type attacks. Just as we have legitimate conventional AI platforms now, so too do we have platforms known as villain AI. And the clue is in the name. They are platforms that are used by hackers to peddle their malicious activities. And they're effectively AI platforms which don't have the safeguards built in. And that gives criminals the power to create sophisticated attacks with very little effort. Now, on top of that, we've also seen the rise of ransomware as a service. Some of you may have heard of that. So if you have criminal aspirations and wish to be a cyber criminal but have no technical ability, you can avail yourself of the work of established criminal groups and buy an oven-ready ransomware kit, which can then be sort of deployed against your target of choice. So the gangs rent their infrastructure out to affiliates, and it means that even people with no technical skill can deploy cyber attacks should they be minded to do so. And those two things put together, Villain AI and ransomware as a service, do much to lower the barrier to entry to cyber threats, and on the other side of that coin, do a lot to increase the volume of attacks that we see. Now, cyber is also a systemic risk. A single issue can cascade across thousands of organizations in hours. And we saw that most recently with the supply chain attack that hit Heathrow and other European international airports across Europe. A business can suffer disruption just because it relies on the same technology as everyone else. And in this day and age, everything is connected to everything, from our watches to our phones to our laptops, our televisions, and everything beyond. And I think that's probably best evidenced by the fact that back in 2017, when the WannaCry attack surfaced, some of you may remember that as being one of the first cyber attacks that impacted many different countries at once. And that impacted 200,000 computers over 150 countries in the first 48 hours. But if you compare that to the CrowdStrike outage of last year, that impacted 8.1 million computers in less than half that time. And to my mind, that's quite a compelling proof of the significant increase in interconnectivity between the 7-year period of WannaCry and CrowdStrike. So the key message I have really is simple. Even if you don't think you're a target, you could still be caught up in the fallout of cyber attacks that you were never meant to face. So now we have got the why hackers seek to target their victims. We can now focus on the how. So next slide, please. So during a speech to the Royal College of Physicians on the 2nd of March, 1944, Sir Winston Churchill said, "The longer you look back, the further forward you can see." And while I very much doubt he had cybercrime in mind, some 50 years before the world went online, the message remains important for present purposes. So if we want to understand where the threats are going, it helps to look back to see how they've evolved. And for present purposes, I'm going to focus mainly on ransomware. And that's not because it's the only cyber threat out there, but because for most businesses, it remains the single most disruptive and costly type of attack. And its evolution over a period of time tells quite a clear story of how the risks have evolved over a short period of time. Now, of course, ransomware is far from the full picture. There are lots of other dangerous threats out there, be it phishing, business email compromise, denial of service attacks, insider threats, supply chain compromises, wipers. There's lots out there that can trip you up, and they can all cause serious harm. But ransomware charts quite elegantly over a 10 or 15-year period. So I will come to look at that now. Now, before I jump into this, I should say the dates that are on the screen before you are indicative only. Obviously, there's a degree of fluidity, so there's not a hard stop for attacks, but over a period of time, you'll get the idea as to how this has evolved. So it's crazy to think that the early days of cybercrime as we now know it came in the late 2000s. And in the early days, cybercrime was relatively unsophisticated. Hackers would send phishing emails, they would guess weak passwords, or they would run simple database attacks. And the goal was pretty straightforward. They wanted to steal personal information and financial records and sell them on the black market. Now, back then, most insurers didn't think they were an obvious target, but the data they held was hugely attractive. So in 2008, Swiss Life France had thousands of records stolen, an early sign that insurance data was becoming a prized commodity. And some of us might remember by the 2010s, attacks became more organized and they much more regularly grabbed headlines. And Sony were a high-profile casualty, as were Yahoo and TalkTalk. So if you found yourself with a cyber issue, you weren't only making the news, you were making the front page. So criminal groups, and in some cases, state-sponsored actors, began launching large-scale intrusions that could run for months before detection. And the motive was clear. They wanted to monetize data at an industrial scale. So in 2015, the US health insurer Anthem suffered a major cyber breach when attackers gained access to its database. through stolen employee credentials, and hackers were able to move across the network undetected for weeks, ultimately exposing the personal information of about 80 million policyholders and employees, including names, dates of birth, social security numbers, and addresses. And it was one of the largest healthcare breaches recorded at that time and became a turning point for the sector, showing regulators and insurers alike just how vulnerable sensitive customer data could be. So we then started seeing an increase in ransomware attacks in the mid-2010s. You may remember that ransomware actually started out as an attack vector against home PCs. A ransom of a few £100 would be demanded to repatriate people with their iTunes account or their holiday photographs. Many chose to simply just buy a new computer rather than dabble with a ransom. But criminals soon realised that they could demand much more by hitting businesses. And by the late 2010s, ransomware were still paralysing corporate operations and bringing businesses it impacted to a complete standstill. Now, in the early days, ransomware was pretty poorly built. The decryption keys didn't always work, which meant if you paid the ransom, you weren't guaranteed to get your data back. But the criminals recognised that this sort of somewhat amateurish attempt at extortion wasn't a sustainable business model. So over time, they tried to make their criminal gains more professional. So they invested in stronger encryption platforms. They even built customer service desks to service demands and help people make the payments and make the ransom payments and recover data. And that reliability turned ransomware into something of a more sustainable business model. But of course, it's important to remember you're dealing with criminals and there's no honour amongst thieves. Now, as businesses improved their defences, ransomware groups had to adapt their tactics. It was becoming much more common for victims of ransomware attacks to restore their computers from backups. They would just flatten the IT infrastructure and start again. Criminals had to change their playbook. So before they encrypted their systems in the Mark II phase of ransomware, they started to steal sensitive data. And that meant that even if a company could be rebuilt from backups, it still faced the threat of its data being published online. And that shift became known as double extortion. So the ransom wasn't just about unlocking the encryption, it was about getting proof of deletion of the confidential information that had been stolen. Now, some gangs went further. They added a third layer of pressure. You won't be terribly surprised to hear that that was called triple extortion. So they would lock the systems, they would steal the data, and then they would go out to the clients, customers, or even threaten to go and tell the regulators about all of the data that had been compromised. Because back then, we didn't have the GDPR reporting timescales for regulators. So the hackers were doing everything they could to pile pressure on the organizations that they hit to force them into paying the ransom. And the Maze ransomware attack on Chubb in 2020 was one of the first high-profile examples of that new approach. The hackers didn't just lock systems, they claimed to have stolen sensitive files and threatened to release them. And that really shows how far ransomware had evolved from an IT outage to a reputational, regulatory, and operational nightmare. Something had been stolen from you and was being held hostage with a ransom demanded. So the self-help remedy of just scrapping the kit and starting again wasn't available. Now, the latest shift that we've seen is about scale. Hackers aren't that interested in going after one company at a time anymore. They are lazy and they want to find efficiencies where they can. So instead, there's a focus on them going for shared suppliers or widely used software that gives them a way into thousands of organizations at once. And the Move It breach in 2023 shows exactly how that works. A single issue and a file transfer tool that thousands of companies relied on was enough to expose data right across industries, including financial services. And the impact was so widespread that PCS formally labelled it as a cyber catastrophe event. And it confirmed what many in the market had already feared, that one weak point in common technology can cause systemic losses that ripple across entire sectors all at the same time. Now, the last box on this slide says the future. The future is here already. We can already see the direction of travel that cyber attacks are taking, and the next phase is starting to take shape. So what we're seeing is a shift back towards data theft. So in the early days, criminals stole information, then ransomware took over, then they locked the systems. But now, with backups improving, many groups aren't bothering with encryption. They're just stealing data and demanding a ransom. But the difference this time is scale, because instead of exfiltrating files a few at a time, attackers are able to exfiltrate hundreds of gigabytes of data at a time, and then use the most sensitive information that they get as leverage to negotiate ransoms. So the risk for businesses isn't just downtime anymore, where systems are paralysed. It's the long tail of disruption, regulatory scrutiny, and customer distrust that comes from that sort of confidential information being compromised. And AI is accelerating the trend. So attackers are now using AI tools to sift through the volumes of data that they exfiltrate. They can instantly pick out the most damaging pieces and use that to increase pressure in ransom negotiations. So what used to take days or weeks can now be done in minutes, and it makes the extortion model faster, sharper, and much harder to defend against. But it's not just the technical side that's changing. Social engineering is being reimagined too. Instead of just sending blanket spam emails that everyone would have recognized as a threat, we're seeing carefully planned multi-stage campaigns. So hackers will start doing research on LinkedIn. They will find out who's in different teams, and they will start to put specific targeted attacks together. Now, deepfakes we touched on at the start, vishing or voice phishing as it's known, is much easier to do now with the advent of AI. So chief exec impersonation through voice calls is a thing. And at the point that you think that you're speaking to your boss or someone senior and you take their instructions at face value, it's very difficult not to be able to tell fact from fiction. So the future of cyber risk is about speed, scale, and precision. It's less about this kind of crude attack of locking people out. It's much more efficient, it's much more sophisticated, and it's much more targeted. Before I move on, I should say something more about two different types of attack vector. The first is zero-click polymorphic ransomware, which you will tell from the name is a form of ransomware, but unlike traditional ransomware, doesn't have to be clicked or downloaded. That's what the zero-click bit stands for. Polymorphic means it's like a shapeshifter. It changes once it's inside the organization to evade any detection systems that you might have. It's a dangerous, dangerous attack vector, and it's something that's coming to the fore at the moment. And wipers, as unpleasant as the name sounds, they wipe everything they touch. So that too can be an issue, particularly where backups are compromised, because effectively you're left with a blank sheet of paper and nobody wants to be left there. Next slide, please. So what I've described are the technical attacks that can be deployed against a business. But as security solutions become more advanced, hackers need to evolve constantly to catch businesses off guard. And that's led to an increasing number of attacks that target people. And of course, people are often said to be the weak link in the cybersecurity chain. And I'm sure we'll all remember the recent scattered spider attacks against M&S, the Co-op, and Harrods. My mother, for example, has never been more interested in cybersecurity than she was when M&S went down, and it did a lot to bring the real-life consequences of cyber attacks to life. People would see the empty shelves for weeks at a time, and it was the first sort of tangible proof that I can remember over a prolonged period of just how much of an impact these attacks have on these organizations. Now, shortly after the retail attacks, Scattered Spider turned their sights on insurers, and in the space of just 5 days, compromised insurance companies, including Aflac, Erie Insurance, and Philadelphia Insurance. Now, those hackers didn't break in with clever malware or zero-day exploits. They used coordinated social engineering campaigns. So the hackers pretended to be staff, they would phone IT help desks, and they would convince someone to reset a password. Then they intercepted the multi-factor authentication and changed the passwords. And with those, they walked straight into corporate systems using legitimate credentials rather than hacking tools. So in short, they didn't beat the technology, they beat the people that were using the technology. And the impact was serious. Large quantities of data were exposed. And again, it was the sort of data that fuels fraud, blackmail, and other financially motivated attacks for a long time after the initial compromise. So the scattered spider attacks showed that even regulated firms with strong IT controls can be compromised by exploiting employees. Next slide, please. So one question I'm often asked is, do we need to be resilient? And the short answer is yes. In recent years, we've seen a significant shift from tick box compliance to rules that force businesses to have and maintain appropriate levels of resilience. So the result is that resilience is no longer optional, it's mandatory. Now, sadly, for global commerce, there is no single codified set of rules, and each sector tends to approach things in a different way. But there are clues and things that businesses can use within the legal and regulatory landscape to understand the duties that fall upon them, but also take inspiration from rules that impact other sectors about what good looks like, and use that to tailor your cybersecurity practices, policies, and plans. So this all began in earnest with the UK GDPR. And we'll all remember, I'm sure, the flat spin that many businesses were in to try to become compliant from a compliance perspective to ensure that all of the policies were compliant with what the regulation required. And under Article 32 of UK GDPR, firms have to have appropriate technical and operational and organisational measures in place to keep data secure. Now, that obligation is broader than many people realise. It isn't just about stopping a breach. It also means keeping systems running and being able to restore access quickly if something goes wrong. Now, the law is clear. Businesses have to safeguard the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of data and systems. And that last point, availability, matters just as much as confidentiality. And Article 32 actually spells it out. It requires firms to restore the availability and access to personal data in a timely manner in the event of a physical or technical incident. And that phrase, in a timely manner, is significant because it confirms that resilience is part of compliance. If your systems collapse and individuals can't access their own data for too long, regulators might treat that as a breach, even if no information was stolen. So the ICO has taken this line on enforcement, fining firms not only for leaks, but also for failing to maintain access where customers were locked out of their own information. And the message for boards is clear. It's not enough to prevent incidents. You also have to be able to recover from them. And the obvious question that follows is, how could you persuade a regulator that you had the appropriate measures in place if your business is completely lost at sea after a cyber attack with no clear plan to restore systems or access to data? Now, I think the most exciting legislative change that's happened of late has been DORA, the Digital and Operational Resilience Act, which came in 2022, enforceable from more recently. And that applies to all financial services firms operating in the EU. So it includes UK businesses that do business in the EU. And what makes DORA stand out is it doesn't just set broad principles, it actually spells out what good looks like and what businesses have to do to be compliant. So it talks of a comprehensive framework for managing technology and cyber risks, not just the ability to respond when something goes wrong, but proper governance, risk identification, protective measures, detection capabilities, and recovery planning. And it also places a strong emphasis on communication. So major technology incidents, just as with GDPR, have to be reported to regulators quickly and clearly, which means boards need defined processes for escalation and reporting. Now, perhaps the most demanding part is testing. And from my perspective, it's the most welcome part of the regulation. So DORA makes it a legal requirement for firms to run regular exercises to prove resilience in practice. Now, critical firms have to undergo advanced threat-led penetration tests at least every 3 years. And more broadly, all firms are expected to carry out scenario-based exercises that show that they can maintain continuity, recover quickly, and ensure suppliers hold up under stress. So to my mind, DORA demystifies cyber resilience. Instead of leaving firms guessing what good looks like. It actually sets out the concrete, tangible steps that make a difference. Strong governance, clear processes, robust testing, and supplier oversight. And that's why even post-Brexit, many UK firms still see real value in aligning with it, because it provides a ready-made framework for boards to follow. And of course, it brings an obvious advantage at the point that businesses wish to conduct business in Europe. Now, the sleeping assassin amongst the legal duties comes under the Companies Act 2006, and it comes in the form of directors' fiduciary duties. So you'll recall that directors have to promote the success of the company and act with reasonable care, skill, and diligence. But what does that mean in practice? Well, it means that IT and cybersecurity can't just be left to the IT team. GDPR made that clear. So cyber resilience and cybersecurity has to be a board level priority. It has to be driven from the top. And we're seeing that if boards fail to prepare for foreseeable incidents, it risks being seen as falling short of those duties. So directors are expected to take responsibility as part of good governance. And the board has to be able to show that it understands the risks, it's asked the right questions, and that the right measures are being put in place. Now, there's a personal dimension here too, because if directors ignore the basics, they risk not just facing regulatory criticism, but also potentially personal liability for failing to meet duties. And there haven't been a lot of cases that have seen personal liability attached to office holders, but going forward, I do see that as one of the areas of law that may quickly develop. Now, it's not just sort of formal statute books that we need to adhere to. The FCA and PRA have set out very clear operational resilience frameworks for insurers and reinsurers, which took effect earlier this year after a 2-year run-in. And at its core, that requires businesses to do 3 main things: identify the most important business services, set clear tolerances for how much disruption those services could withstand, and then test regularly against severe but plausible scenarios. Now, the PRA makes it clear that testing shouldn't stand still. It has to become more challenging over time, moving from simple tabletop exercises to full simulations. And again, that's music to my ears, because frankly, if a business isn't practicing relevant threats, and is practicing threats that haven't been seen for 3 or 4 years, it's a waste of time. For it to be relevant and helpful for a business, it has to be modelling real current threats. Now, on top of that, we have the FCA's consumer duty, which adds another layer of accountability. Firms have to avoid causing foreseeable harm to customers. And if a cyber incident meant that client needs couldn't be met, it's hard to see how that wouldn't amount to a breach of duty. And supplier oversight is another key point. Under the PRA's outsourcing rules, relevant firms have to show that they're critical third parties, whether that's cloud providers, IT vendors, or other parties, are able to deliver appropriate levels of resilience. So if a supplier fails, regulators will treat that as the firm's own failure. And that's the sort of provision that can create significant, albeit indirect, liabilities for businesses that don't have appropriate cybersecurity measures in place. Now, some of you may have heard of the National Cybersecurity Centre's Cyber Assessment Framework, or CAF as it's known. That is increasingly used as a benchmark for cyber resilience. It isn't legislation, and I should make absolutely clear that it applies to critical national infrastructure as opposed to FCA and PRA regulated businesses currently. But a variety of regulators, including Ofgem, Ofcom, and the ICO, often refer to it when measuring compliance with cyber resilience obligations. And the CAF is built around 4 objectives: managing risk, protecting against attack, detecting incidents, and minimizing impact. Now, those objectives are broken down into 14 principles covering areas like supply chain security, logging and monitoring, and recovery planning. But for businesses, the benefit of the CAF is that it makes resilience more tangible. So instead of treating it as an abstract concept, it provides a structured way to test whether the appropriate arrangements are in place and identify where improvements are needed. Now, it's not just laws, it's not just regulations. starts to come down to market expectation, because corporate clients are now much more regularly looking closely at resilience in their own due diligence and contract formation. So it's no longer a nice to have. Resilience is a must have, because at the point that you're looking to do business with new parties, very often they will have formidable questionnaires that require to be filled out to make sure that you're not going to introduce cyber threat into their ecosystem. So being well prepared and having the appropriate things in place can be a real help and short circuit some of the bureaucracy that would otherwise sit around what can be quite a lengthy and tortuous process. And of course, if businesses don't do that and they can't show that they're appropriately resilient or have cyber, adequate levels of cyber resilience, then they risk losing business at retender or failing to win new business as a result of not doing well enough in the due diligence process. And for insurance, I think market trust is really important. Insurance is at its core, a business built on trust, and it does a lot of outward-looking good in circumstances where businesses can be seen to be treating resilience and cybersecurity as a business priority, not just an afterthought. So on paper, the law is very clear, not just in the financial services sector, but across many others too. Every sector now demands clear evidence of cyber resilience. And if I can have the next slide, please. But it's all very well and good to say that, but the challenge is for boards, turning legal language into practice is hard. In most boardrooms, the concept of resilience still feels quite abstract, and sometimes people talk about board apathy. I have to say I don't like that phrase. I think it's more board confusion, because most of the businesses that I speak to have cyber as top of, or very near the top of their risk register. So I don't think it's board apathy. I think it's board confusion. I think many boards don't understand what they need to do at an operational level to make their business secure and appropriately resilient to bounce back from a cyber attack. And if you're scared of making the wrong decision, you make no decision. It's human nature. But making no decision and doing nothing is the worst thing that you could do, because in a live cyber incident, the clock is ticking. Regulators, customers, and the media will not wait whilst a firm works out what its obligations mean in practice. And every gap will be exposed instantly. So that's why resilience isn't about theory or box ticking. It's about building the muscle memory that allows people to act quickly and confidently under pressure. And that's why we need to think about what effective resilience looks like in practice. We need something that boards can actually see, test, and measure. And so far, we've looked at why attacks happen and what the regulators expect. But the most important question is, what does resilience actually look like in practice? And that's difficult to answer because there is no one-size-fits-all solution. The right measures will depend on the scale, complexity, and risk profile of the business, but there are some building blocks that every firm needs to have in place. Next slide, please. So, at the heart of resilience are the documents and frameworks that tell people what to do when things go wrong. Effectively, it helps people find the fire exits when the building's on fire. Now, they aren't written and forgotten about. They're about giving the business clarity and direction under pressure. And there's really four main building blocks that every board should expect to see in their battle box. So the first starts with policies, plans, and playbooks. And that's what the PPP box stands for on the board in front of you. So the first thing that a business should absolutely have in its cyber battle box is an incident response plan. And that'll set out how a business will detect, contain, and recover from a cyber attack. And that'll provide the framework for escalation, for technical response, and leadership decisions when time is short and pressure's on. And a well-prepared plan will go further than just setting out the technical steps. It'll make clear who's responsible for what decisions need to be taken, and how communications will be managed, both internally and externally. It addresses difficult questions, such as whether or not the business would entertain paying a ransom, and give advance notice of the legal considerations that we need to sit around that about proceeds of crime or sanctions. And good plans are also practical. They'll set out contact details for key personnel, They'll provide checklists for containment and specify escalation thresholds so businesses know what authority they have and when they need to escalate things up the chain. Now, the incident response plan must also integrate with the wider business continuity and disaster recovery arrangements so that there are no gaps or overlaps. But in short, the purpose of an incident response plan is to remove uncertainty as and when the worst happens. So when an incident happens, if you're following an effective incident response plan, the goal is that everyone knows their role, the process to follow, and the boundaries for decision making. And you can obviously see the efficiencies that flow from that. And so that clarity is going to be what enables a coordinated and credible response under pressure. Now, two things that I have seen in practice. I have been called in to boardrooms in circumstances where there has been a cyber attack, and I've asked to see the incident response plan, only to be told that it's saved on the system. And that isn't terribly helpful where your business has just been ransomware. So I would encourage you, to the extent that you've got an incident response plan, make sure you print it off. Make sure everyone in your incident response team has a copy, both in the office and at home, because you'll need sort of contact details, out of hours numbers, and all these sorts of practical things that will be helpful when the worst happens. The other thing sometimes people forget about is how are you going to communicate? Very often it's done in peace times via Teams or Messenger or Outlook, but if all of those systems fail, how are you going to maintain your services? And I've seen before where there's been a capability on Teams on remote devices that the incident response team will be exchanging messages on that. But guess what? The hackers can see every message that's sent. So you need something that's completely detached from your corporate systems so that the insurers aren't looking over your shoulder. Sorry, the hackers aren't looking over your shoulder and stay one step ahead of the response effort by seeing what the incident response actually looks like. So the next thing you would want to have are business continuity plans. As the name suggests, they're designed to make sure that the most important services can keep running, if at all possible, post-event. They'll set out the sorts of things that businesses should prioritise, what the workarounds are, what manual processes could be used, and how teams could continue to operate without their usual systems. Again, a good plan would recognise that the disruption isn't just technical, so it will cover people, processes, and customers as well. And they will also look at the sort of practical alternatives, how we switch to paper-based processes to using backup sites or third-party providers. So that will cover everything the business could and should be doing to make sure that the business sort of stays as operational as it can do. Disaster recovery plans, I would recommend that businesses have as well. They will talk about how systems post-event will be brought back online. They will also map out interdependencies between systems so that the boards can see the impact of switching something off in the event that they suffer an attack. They'll say, well, okay, if we do that, we're going to lose all of these other systems. So it's helpful to know how everything works at the point that you're switching things off. And it's also important to make sure that you know when things are being switched back on. And playbooks are important. They will provide a more granular level of detail on the incident response plan. So it might take steps to step you through either a ransomware attack or a data breach or something similar. It just provides that practical guidance to walk you through. And it's important that boards know whether they're at the beginning, middle, or end of their attack sequencing. Now, it's all very well to have those documents, but you have to make sure that they work. And the only way that you can make sure that they work is to undertake exercising. Now, exercises can take many different forms. It can take the form of a tabletop, a TTX, which is what that stands for on the slide before you, where leaders will assemble around a boardroom table and work through a realistic scenario. But at the other end of the spectrum are full simulations, full cyber exercises, where we bring along a team of ethical hackers to mock up or attack a mocked up scenario or infrastructure with members of your executive team and incident response teams making decisions based on what's happening with the battle between the ethical hackers and your security teams. Now, the purpose of exercising isn't to pass or fail. Is to expose weaknesses and build muscle memory and give leaders the chance to rehearse their roles before a real-life crisis forces them to. And that's the point. Lots of people are quite nervous about undertaking exercising because they worry that it'll expose gaps in their organisation. But that's the point of them. It's much better to find out where your gaps are in training conditions than when a hacker's in your system and you're trying to answer to your clients and regulators and stakeholders and everyone else. Now, one point to flag is that in circumstances where businesses haven't encountered tabletop exercises or cyber exercising before, there is the option for exercising or facilitated exercising to take place, where we can come in, we can support your incident response and executive teams with the sorts of things that they should be doing at the point that they suffer a real life cyber attack. So if you haven't done it before, that option is available, and over a period of time, once confidence builds, we're able to sort of support the business move to doing these more independently. After action reviews is what AAR stands for. We need to capture what went well and what went less well post-exercise, because the business has to be in a continual journey of improvement. And it's only by capturing these, lessons that we can make sure that we are on a constant journey of improvement. And we end up with a situation where resilience is not a destination, it's a journey. Tech continues to evolve, threats continue to evolve. So we're going to have to continue to make sure that we test topical threats and we make sure we learn lessons. What's going well, what's going less well, and bake that into what the response looks like. Next slide, please. So why does any of this matter? Well, the short answer is it's expected and none of it is optional anymore. The laws and regulations speak with a single voice. Firms have to prove that they can prepare for disruption, withstand it, and recover from it. So policies, plans, and playbooks provide the structure. Exercising proves that those structures work, and after action reviews ensures lessons are learned and embedded for next time. Now, the detail will look different in every firm, but regulators, neither regulators nor the market are interested as to whether or not you can point to a document. What matters is whether you can stay operational when it counts, and that's the new baseline. And we know that this approach works. After the 7/7 bombings in London, a special review committee was set up by the London Assembly to look at how the city had responded. And the idea was simple. They wanted to look at what went well and what had gone less well and what lessons needed to be learned for the future. And in its findings, the committee made a point of highlighting that the pre-existing, well-rehearsed emergency plans played a central role in what it described as an outstanding response. So it wasn't luck, it was the result of preparation, because the plans had been tested in advance and the response teams knew what they had to do on the day. Next slide, please. More recently, when AFLAC were hit by Scattered Spider, just 8 days after the attack, AFLAC were able to issue this response. And to me, this is a real sign of strength. In circumstances where this attack had rampaged through the retail sector and the insurance sector before moving on to the aviation sector, to be able to say we promptly initiated our cyber incident response protocols and stopped the intrusion within hours. Importantly, our business remains operational and our systems were not affected by ransomware. Just think about how powerful a message that is, to be able to put that out just a short period after facing a significant adversity. And of course, that's not luck. That is the result of hard work over a long period of time ahead of the threat being encountered. Next slide, please. So historically, compliance and resilience are often treated as costly overheads, and having been in private practice now for more than 2 decades, I know only too well how unpopular compliance spend can be within a business. But I have to say that that mindset is slightly outdated, particularly when it comes to cyber resilience. Today, resilience is a differentiator. Procurement teams now scrutinise resilience in tendering. Investor firms favour firms that can demonstrate resilience, and customers place their trust in providers who they believe will stand firm when disruption hits and not introduce cyber threat into their ecosystem. The market punishes failure quickly, but it rewards resilience just as quickly, and businesses that recover well often emerge stronger, with reputational reputation enhanced, and sometimes after an efficient response, even an increased share price. We've seen that before. So done well, resilience isn't just about defence. Done well, it is a competitive advantage. It builds trust, it wins contracts, and it protects leadership. And above all, it keeps businesses operating whilst others around them falter. So the real question that I would encourage you to have a think about is, would your organisation be ready to respond with confidence when you encounter cyber disruption? Or would you be left explaining to regulators, investors, or customers why you weren't ready for cyber disruption that could be said to be inevitable? So with that said, that concludes everything I planned to cover today, but I'd be very happy to take questions if anyone has any.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions. I put one on the chat and I've got a few others that were submitted before. So first question we had was, what are the risks of actually paying the ransom?
So despite the fact that ransom gangs moved to try to sort of pitch it as a business model, you're effectively dealing with criminals. So the big risk is that you pay the ransom and you don't get back what you hope to get back. I think there's lots of facts and figures that sit around about this. I think there's a commonality amongst them is most people get something back, but very few people get everything back. And it's not unusual for the goalposts to change with what the amounts are. So from a practical perspective, it might not meet your objectives. But there's also sort of risks that can flow from it. So you would need to take advice about whether or not there were any sanctions implications, or whether or not there was any sort of proceeds of crime type implications around paying a ransom. There's no blanket ban on doing it. It comes down to sort of the circumstances and what the business's stance is on whether or not it's appropriate. But the main risks are doing it without taking advice to make sure that it can be done safely from a legal and regulatory perspective, but also making sure that we have the greatest confidence that we can that A, they have what they say they've stolen, and B, it's going to be deleted afterwards.
Thank you. There's no other questions popped up in the chat, so I'll work through mine, and hopefully that will, if anyone has a question, gives them a bit of typing time. So next question we had submitted before was, do you think that AI will improve so that it's assisting in terms of the technical cyber security solutions? So can we work faster than the cyber criminals?
I would say yes and no. So one of the big problems that cybersecurity people on the technical side have at the moment is alert fatigue, because a lot of these things are so sensitive that the sort of monitoring platforms say that everything's on fire all the time. And that becomes quite wearing after a while. And I would hope that efficiencies will start to be able to emerge by putting AI into these security solutions to try to just temper down how reactive a lot of these security solutions are. So to that end, I think that it will bring efficiencies, and I think that it will start to make a difference as to how sensitive some of these 24/7, 365 monitoring platforms are. And it will be able to machine learn what's an actual threat and what's actually just a false positive. I think where AI will lag behind is that the threat has to come before the security solution, and that almost has to happen. You can't guard against a threat that doesn't yet exist. So the threat always has to come first. So to that extent, given the speed at which these attacks can be sort of proliferated across globally in a matter of hours, I think we will always continue, or we will continue to have a challenge to have the cybersecurity solutions keeping up with the attacks that continue to develop day on day.
Thank you. And one more question. So this one's looking into your thoughts around the government's proposals to make paying a ransom illegal for businesses operating in critical national infrastructure.
So that's an interesting point, and I think I touched on it in my presentation, that one of the challenges of effective cyber resilience is that it's just it's such a patchwork quilt, and each sector's marching to the beat of a different drum. I think the proposed ban on ransomware targets for CNI is well intended, because I think that the logic behind it is, if we make it illegal, the threat actors won't target our critical national infrastructure and will keep them safe as a result. I would make 2 points about that. I think that's very well intended, but I also think it could perhaps be a little naive. A lot of nation state attacks are not financially motivated. It will come as a result of asymmetric warfare or something similar, where someone's trying to make a point and disrupt critical national infrastructure. So the ban on ransomware payments, I don't think will make a difference. And I also see a problem, because as attacks get more sophisticated, what if paying the ransom is your only option? And critical national infrastructure, by its very nature, will employ hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of people. So if you lose your records or your immutable backups fail, what then? So I think that would need to be treated with caution. And I think to the extent that there was to be a blanket ban, there would need to be some availability to seek dispensation in appropriate circumstances where the facts mitigated or dictated that a ransom had to be paid because there was no other option. It was an extinction event otherwise.
Thank you. That seems very logical. And we have a question in the chat, which is it correct to say that most breaches are as a result of people rather than systems failing, as in the example you gave on Scattered Spider?
To some degree, yes. Because historically there would have had to be some degree of human intervention, whether it's clicking a link or downloading a weaponized attachment or something like that. That does, historically, humans are the weakest link, and that's one of the big challenges, because that isn't going to change. I remember speaking at an event at Holyrood a few years back, and the Scottish Information Commissioner was there, and she was talking about the fact that a very substantial number of the staff had failed the phishing training the day after that the training had taken place. And at the point that, a sizable, at the point it only takes one person to click on something, at the point that, a percentage of 20 or 30% routinely fail, we need to do more to educate. But most businesses are on that journey now, and to the extent that it's not just pass or fail, repeat offenders will be given more training so that they're more alert to the risks. But yes, I think to the extent that they're needed to deploy some other more technical attack vectors, it's fair to say that humans are the weakest link.
Thank you. And I think that does really bring us to the end, unless there's anyone typing, because we've used maximum time. We have 1 minute left. Just to say thank you. You've got the contact details there on the slide. So yes, thank you very much to Craig for the session. It was very enlightening, and I'm sure people will be off changing their passwords and updating documents this afternoon. So yeah, so thank you very much, Craig, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much.